Hey, I'm Todd Nelson, and I heard of a thing recently on the internet that has been getting some buzz, and I got some thoughts on it. I'd like to put them out there because I think maybe some people haven't thought of things from this point of view. So, the thing I want to talk about is the Mandela Effect, or the supposed Mandela Effect. I was talking to a coworker, and he was telling me about how he had watched these videos of this kid, and this kid was a theoretical physicist, and this kid was talking about how parallel universes exist, and that the Mandela Effect is a result of parallel universes and things like that. So, basic definition, I guess what people call the Mandela Effect, is when a group or a person, but especially a group of people or multiple people, remember something a certain way, and then you go back and check history books and whatnot, and the events did not occur that way, or something's different than it used to be in their memory and things like that. You can get on the internet and just Google Mandela Effect, and you'll find all kinds of wild ideas. It's really interesting. I like subjects like this, and I like interesting mind expanding thoughts or whatever, but I find some fatal flaws in this thinking, and I would like to point out some of those things. Number one, parallel universes are not a proven thing. They are not, they are theories. Even the kid on the videos, his name is Max Laughlin, I think I'm pronouncing that right. He even says in his videos that it's just a theory and that you can't prove a theory necessarily or whatever. So these are just theories about whether parallel universes exist and all that type of stuff anyway. It's based on some very sketchy info in my opinion, but I'm not a theoretical physicist, so that could be a lot of it too. But the idea that the universe has shifted into another slightly or infinitely far away and infinitely close paradoxical universe is, to me, it just doesn't hold water. And it's not just that. There's other things. I've got other ideas about this, and maybe you'll find convincing as well. But I find that the truth is simple, it's plain, and usually the simplest explanation is the correct one. If I found a bunch of footprints in the middle of my home, my first impulse would not be that, hey, these must be alien footprints because Martians landed on Earth and tracked mud into my home. No, I would first think it was probably one of my cats or something like that. The truth is usually simple, and the simplest explanation is usually the correct one. Not always, admittedly. I'm going to say that twice because I know people will attack that. Not always is the simplest explanation the true one. But just getting down to the basic, the thing that started the whole theory to begin with. Nelson Mandela was a civil rights activist in South Africa, and he was imprisoned for the things he did and things like that, and then he got out of prison and actually became president of South Africa, and he died in 2013. Well, a lot of people remember it that he died in prison back in the 80s, and that they even remember seeing clips of his funeral or things like that. Okay, so that's an interesting thing, and a lot of people do have that experience. The thing that instantly occurred to me, as I said, that sounds very familiar to me too, so at first I'm kind of like, that is strange. But then I realized there was a movie in the end of the 80s called Cry Freedom, and it's about the South African activist Stephen Biko, who was very anti-apartheid as well, and he ended up being imprisoned and beaten and ended up dying. And in the movie they show a lot of his struggles and everything, and they show how he ended up, they even showed his funeral in the movie and things like that. And then you can also get on YouTube and Google this or look it up on YouTube. Stephen, Stephen Biko, Biko. You can even see pieces of his funeral that I think his AP put on YouTube, old footage of it. So, I mean, the footage was out there even when it happened and everything. So, this to me, I think, is probably the most plausible explanation for why people think that Nelson Mandela died in prison back in the 80s and everything, and that they saw his funeral. They probably are confusing the two people because they had very similar characteristics in that they were both civil rights activists and they were anti-apartheid, and they were both in prison, and they were, both had all kinds of struggles and trials and everything. So I think that may be why people are confusing those things, especially something that happened 30 years ago. I mean, and a lot of these things are like, oh, you remember this thing from your childhood and it must be correct the way you remember it, and this is not the way it was before, so it's a parallel universe, which is a bunch of hooey in my opinion. But it doesn't make sense to me. I'm not trying to slight anybody really, but it just doesn't make any sense to me. I think it's intellectual arrogance. It's where people hear something, it sounds good, and they just buy into it and they run with it. And it's like, you see this a lot with conspiracy theories too, where people will hear like some things that they've never heard before, and then they'll hear another fact they've never heard before, and before you know it, it's reptilians are ruling the world and shape-shifting, and the Illuminati's controlling everything. I'm not saying there's not weird stuff out there, and I'm not saying there might not be a conspiracy or two, but I think we need to be reasonable about things sometimes too. And in this case, there is a definite logical explanation. It doesn't have anything to do with theoretical physics or anything like that. It's just a case of misremembering something. And I think what it is, and that intellectual arrogance that most of us have, and I've had it before too, we tend to believe we know we're correct. We know because there was this fact and that other fact that made us realize that we are remembering correctly. The universe has changed. The simplest explanation is usually the more plausible one, and I think a lot of times that we may mix up similarities in our mind and in our brain, and we know this happens. I mean, how many people know women that have more than one kid, and they'll call one kid that's obviously different from the other kid the name of, child A and child B, get their names mixed up. Fred and Bob, they call Bob Fred and Fred Bob or whatever. I mean, it happens all the time. So we know that people can mix things up, even mothers with their own children. And women with their wives, I think, can know that husbands tell stories sometimes and we mess them up bad. We mess these stories up and we forget details, and wives are really cool like that. They can remember details of things for like forever, eternity, never forget anything. So I think maybe if we just stop and take a step back from this, we can see it's probably just a case of misremembering things. And Google that. Google Stephen Biko. The other things like Curious George's tail being that he used to have a tail, or that Chick-fil-A was spelled differently than it is, or whatever. I mean, these are just things that I think people are not really thinking through very well. But anyways, just maybe this will put some different light on it for you, and I hope that you found it interesting, and reply or comment or video reply or whatever. Thanks.